Buongiorno. Good morning or afternoon. There's lots of seats up front. Nobody ever likes to sit up front. Anyway, good morning, good afternoon. My name's Mathew Ingram. I'm not going to talk a lot about myself. I'm going to talk about the person that I'm introducing. It gives me great pleasure to be here to introduce someone who I consider to be both a mentor and a friend. Some of you may know that Jay Rosen is a journalism professor at New York University, and that he's runs an experimental program there called Studio 20. And some of you may know that he's been one of the leading journalism academics in the US for, I think, a couple of decades anyway. But more than that, I think Jay's been the standard bearer, if you will, for a bunch of journalistic concepts or new media concepts that are effectively shaping the world that we see around us. Jay was among the first people to champion the idea of what we now call crowdsourcing for journalistic purposes, something I feel very strongly about. In 2006, which was the same year that Twitter was born in a park in San Francisco, Jay wrote about the people formerly known as the audience, which is a very compelling concept, and how they were seizing the tools of publishing for themselves. He and Dan Gilmore, another new media veteran who's also here in Perugia, believed that journalists should acknowledge that in many cases their readers, their audience, know more about a topic than they do, and that by bringing those people in and allowing them to help us, we can actually create better journalism. So when I first met Jay, he was promoting this idea at an online news association conference in Toronto, where I live in Canada. Anybody been to Toronto? It's pretty great, right? So Jay was there for a conference. I was a blogger at a newspaper in Toronto, constantly having to explain what the word blog meant and why it was such a dumb word. And so I reached out to Jay, and we met for a drink in this hotel bar. And Jay was talking about something that he called beat blogging. And beat blogging was the idea that reporters covering a specific topic, the environment or health or government or pretty much anything, could use social media, blogs, and I think Twitter was just barely invented. So he was thinking about how you could use those tools to improve your reporting on a particular beat, how you could build a group of experts or just people who had experience in that area, and you could reach out to them and they could become a kind of expert help for you while you were writing about that topic. Very powerful concept. And Jay's still effectively working on new formulations of this idea. I think it's a big part of the membership puzzle project, which he's going to talk about, his interest in De Correspondent, membership-funded journalism, effectively community-powered journalism in a way. So in a lot of ways, I don't know how you feel, but the early days of blogging and Twitter seem like ancient history now. It seems like 100 years ago that I first started using Twitter. Now we have the President of the United States is using his social media account to declare war on countries and plan bombing attacks on Syria and so on, and promoting fake news. In a lot of ways, it's a darker time, I think, than those early days when we were sort of had a utopian view of what the web was going to allow. But in any case, the bottom line is that Jay has been around from the very beginning, and I think he's thought about a lot of these topics very deeply. So I think he's the perfect person to do this keynote. So please join me in welcoming Jay.
Thank you very much, Mathew, and thanks to the festival for inviting me. This is a truly amazing event and an incredible venue. I teach in a program at NYU that focuses on innovation in journalism, And at the end of the program, when the students graduate, we make them give presentations about their final projects. And they work on them very hard, they practice them, they try to perfect them. And as they get closer to the date, they get nervous about giving what is, for many of them, their first public speech. And I say to them, you really shouldn't be nervous because the audience is really nervous. When people come to a public talk like this, they may not always realize it, but they have an undercurrent of anxiety because they don't want the speaker to suck. Because it's really embarrassing for that person, and it's kind of embarrassing for you to be listening to it. And so I say to my students, if you can start your talk with a little joke, people will laugh, and that will help them release the tension, and then they'll be able to listen to you. So my students listen to this, and they say to me, now we have to be funny? You're making it worse. So anyway, you can release your tension now because I know what I'm doing. See, it worked. My title is Optimizing Journalism for Trust. In a book called Politics and Vision, the philosopher Sheldon Wolin said that when there is vision, things appear in their corrected fullness. I really love that phrase, things appear in their corrected fullness. And this helps explain what I mean by optimizing for trust. It is a vision or direction in which we have to move, we who care about international journalism. For trust can no longer be assumed. Its continuous production has to be designed for. Nor does trust any longer follow from good practice, which is what American journalists used to mean by the term credibility. Once upon a time, you had credibility. That was the way they talked. If you followed the rules of good practice. And that doesn't work anymore. We have to redesign the modern news organization so that it is easier for people to trust it, which, of course, doesn't guarantee that they will. And we have to make it easier for people to form a relationship with the news sites whose work they value. Otherwise, Facebook and Google and maybe Apple News will own that relationship. It was Aaron Pailhofer of Temple University, formerly The Guardian and New York Times, who's here today, who got me thinking in this direction. In 2016, he asked, what would a news organization look like if it was optimized not for clicks, not for scoops, or for time on site, but for trust? I thought this was a great question. So I started talking about it on social media and writing about it. Emily Bell of The Guardian and Columbia, who was normally at this conference but absent this year, did not agree with me. She said the question was badly framed. She said that trust was a poor metric for quality journalism. Breitbart optimizes for trust, she said. So does the Daily Mail. At first, I didn't understand this objection. Certainly, I didn't trust Breitbart with news, nor did I think it was built for trust. And yet, I had to admit, its core supporters, its fans, did trust it. In a way, Breitbart was optimized for those fans. So in a way, it was optimized for trust. In wrestling with Emily's dismissal of trust as a poor metric, I realized that she was right about the question being badly framed. It's easy to get some people to trust you if you present as news only those things that support their existing beliefs, or if you demonize the people they deeply resent, as Breitbart tends to do. And it works even better if the beliefs you are always confirming with your headlines have been labeled extreme by elites or dismissed as unfit for public discussion. A kind of trust can be built that way, on resentment news, on transgression, on confirmation bias. So I realized that my image of a newsroom optimized for trust was incomplete. The problem is not how to generate trust by publishing news. Trump, in a way, does that with his Twitter feed. And there's polling to indicate that he is more trusted as a source of information than the news media is by Republicans in the United States. In this sense, his campaign to discredit the American press is working. In one poll I found, Trump as an information source was more trusted among Republicans than even Fox News. If trust by itself is a poor metric, our design problem becomes how to combine high standards of verification with optimizing the news organization for trust. How to combine high standards of verification with optimizing the news organization for trust. Here's another way to say it. In publishing news, the hard part is not to stay in business. The kids in Macedonia, using Facebook and producing a simulation of news, can do that. The hard part, I said, is not to stay in business, it's to stay in journalism, which means to accept its constraints. The most important of which is, did that really happen? Along with, does the public need to know it? Did that really happen? Have we given a fair description of events? Breitbart doesn't care enough about these things to stay in journalism. Trump cares even less about verification, which is why he's a terrible source for news, and it's kind of terrifying that some people rely on him for that. For the kids in Macedonia and other bad actors like them, it's probably a defect if the crazy thing they're reporting as news actually happened. So let me repeat, the problem is not how to generate trust by publishing news that some people like and share. In a world of open platforms, that's pretty easy to do. The problem is how to combine high standards of verification with a bold and creative vision that optimizes for trust and finds support among readers, viewers, and listeners. Again, it's not how to stay in business, it's how to stay in journalism. That phrase, by the way, is not mine. It's from the British publisher Harold Evans. Now I want to unpack this suitcase I've been carrying around, the phrase optimizing for trust. When we click on that icon, here are some of the items it displays. When I can easily understand not only the news story I read when I clicked through, but the data policy I bought into when I signed up, that's optimizing for trust. When I know that you'll report it when it's nailed down, and that you'll also correct it when it comes apart, that's optimizing for trust. When I can click on your reporter's name and find not only her bio and archive, but where she's coming from, what motivates her in her journalism. That's optimizing for trust. When I can go to the About tab on your site and learn not only about your mission and ownership, but also about your reporting priorities, where you're spending scarce resources and why, that's optimizing for trust. When I can feel you getting better at listening to the internet, even as you publish on the internet, when I can add my knowledge to yours to make for a better product, when my attention is not grabbed but given, when you as a reporter not only know your stuff but show your work, when responding to criticism and sorting the valid from the invalid criticism is considered a vital newsroom skill that everyone has to be good at, when educating people with your journalism is joined to educating them about journalism and how it's done, when reporters share their learning curve, even as readers share their expertise, when the people who value the work elect to support it financially and want it to spread to the public it was made for, when you not only ask supporters for money, but explain how you use their money, when radical transparency combines with genuine diversity to make something better than objectivity, when all those things start happening together and form their own newsroom culture, then we're beginning to optimize for trust. As some of you know, for the past year, I've been working with the Dutch site, De Correspondent, as it expands into English language publishing. They have a clear sense of how to optimize for trust using the membership model. When I look at their design, the things I have been talking about here appear in their corrected fullness. That's why I'm helping the Correspondent break into the American market. They have a vision in Sheldon Wolin's sense. To conclude this, I need to point out that everything I've talked about today arises from a shift we ought to recognize and embrace in the journalism world. The users of journalism, the readers, the listeners, the viewers, the subscribers, the members, have more power now. They have more power. In part because they have more choice, in part because they are paying more of the costs as the advertising subsidy declines. Because the users of the product have more power, the makers of the product have to listen to them more. Increasingly, the quality of your journalism will depend on the strength of your relationship with the people who use and value your work. I want to repeat that because it's so important. The quality of your journalism will increasingly depend on the strength of your relationship with the people who recognize and value your work. Optimizing for trust is just a name for the shift in imagination required if news organizations are to recognize this new balance of power. Grazie.
Thank you so much. I have so many questions, and I'm sure lots of other people do too. So I'm going to ask some, and then I'm hoping that you'll ask some. You are the people formerly known as the audience, so please come up with some good ones. Jay loves the really hard questions. I had a bunch of questions I was going to start with, but I'm going to ignore those because I wanted to push back a little bit on. I see the structure of what you laid out, optimizing for trust, in sort of responding to Emily's criticisms. I remember being part of that conversation. I've had similar conversations with people here about trust being the wrong term, and I wanted, is it possible that, say, not just Breitbart, but something we don't even know about or something we haven't heard about, could do all the things that you said, have all the pieces of that structure, and still be doing something bad? So they could have fact-checking, they could have transparency, they could be building relationships with their readers, but all of those things could be based on falsehoods, could be based on, Fox News and Breitbart do what's almost a simulation of journalism.
Yeah.
It's like being in the upside down world, or going through the looking glass, where they're kind of, it looks like journalism, and yet what they're achieving is something bad. Could they do all the things you've described but still be doing something wrong? Or
I see what you're asking, and I don't know. Fox, to take the example you cited, is terrible at verification.
True.
It's great at engaging its audience. It's discovered an unserved audience, which it deserves credit for. And there are some journalists at Fox who observe the routines of verification. But if you look at its most potent programming, it fails the verification test like 20 times
Right.
an hour. So could it happen? I'm not sure, because even when you have an ideologically aligned news site with a loyal readership that believes in it, and there's like a fit there, even then, real journalism requires that sometimes you disappoint your supporters by reporting what is as opposed to what they want to
Right.
be. And
But I guess the risk is that some of those people won't care. So we might not define it as journalism because we're journalists. The audience for that content fundamentally won't care.
sure, I think we're in that situation now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even verification and fact-checking, one of the things that I struggle with is that in some circles, particularly the alt-right in the US, when something is fact-checked by mainstream media and proven to be wrong, that's actually evidence of the opposite.
Yeah, true.
I don't know how do you correct that?
Get out of that loop?
Yeah.
I have no idea. It's one of the reasons I'm so disturbed
Damn, I was hoping
by
you
the
would,
current environment. No,
I was
I
hoping you would know. Yeah.
try another question.
Because now you're doing the exact thing that you think as a journalist or as a, someone who's fighting for truth, that this is what you should do, and the process is very straightforward, and there are lots of organizations that are doing it, and yet what they produce is not believed by.
Right. The economist A.O. Hirschman wrote a fascinating little book about 20 years ago called Exit, Voice, and Loyalty. And the thesis of this book was that when people are dissatisfied with a firm, he was writing about companies, but it could be governments, it could be systems. When people are dissatisfied with the system, they have three choices: exit, voice, and loyalty. Loyalty is when you stick around even though you're dissatisfied, right? Because you're a Cubs fan, and even though the Chicago Cubs haven't won since 1909,
Right.
what can you do? You're a Cubs fan.
Yeah.
Right.
Maple Leafs are the same.
Maple Leafs. That's loyalty. Voice is when you say, hey, Ford Motor Company, I bought a Ford and it broke down after a year and I'm very dissatisfied and
Right.
you should hear about my experience. That's voice. Right.
An exit is just you opt out.
An exit is you opt out. And the market is really good at exit because it allows you to just opt
Right.
out, right? So one way of interpreting what's gone on in the American public sphere is that a portion of the electorate has exited from journalism. And when they do that, it's very hard for journalists to respond to that because they are not there. They're
Right.
not there on the
Right.
receiving end of the press. And no, I don't know what to do about it, except I just gave you a description of it right, that can help
Well,
you understand it.
And describing it is definitely a benefit. But I guess I've been thinking about particularly membership, community, the sort of goals that you're talking about that journalistic organizations can employ or rely on, or as an alternative to advertising, but also as a way of sort of serving a core readership or core community and building those relationships and all the things that Dick Correspondent has done that are hugely powerful. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking about, every sword cuts two ways and everything that's powerful can be used for good or evil. So all of those things that I see as valuable, that I think you see as valuable, building community, strong relationships, membership, supporting, could all be used by bad people.
Well, whether that,
the tools themselves
whether
don't
those
make
tools,
it good.
whether that would survive high standards of verification, I'm not sure. That's
But
why
again-
I added it.
But again, high standards of verification is something that you and I care about. But
Well, they may not care about that. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. We're in that situation now.
That's a tough one. Does anybody have any solutions? Yes. Charlie has a solution.
I've just stolen the solution from Tana, who's sitting next to me.
Okay.
It's not the solution, but it's the injunction upon journalism, which should always be. I completely agree with Jay about building communities and so on. But one of the other great injunctions of journalism is that it seeks attention. It goes and finds people to connect with. And isn't the thing, when we see people exit from journalism, shouldn't we just follow them? We should go where they are. We should stop calling them bad people, for example.
What if they are bad people?
Well, that's the problem, Matt. They're not going to listen to you if you call them bad people.
They might not listen anyway.
No, but then you don't have to follow them. But I think it's a moral, political, and even economic duty of journalists to follow and to understand.
Yeah. I think that's one strategy in this situation, is to, like Charlie said, follow the people who have exited from journalism and maintain your interest in them, right? And explain where they've gone in their ideological journey. And report on them back to the other people who are still kind of in the public sphere. I think there's value in that. It doesn't mean they're going to be customers for your reporting.
That could be valuable, but not a solution.
Right,
I
it's not a
guess is
solution.
what I'm saying.
But to back up a second, in the 1950s, the great sociologist C. Wright Mills employed this very useful distinction between troubles and issues. And what he said is that troubles are the things that worry people in their daily lives, the things they talk about at night over the kitchen table with their spouse. Issues is what the political system makes to decide elections and fight and determine who has power. Right? When issues get too disconnected from troubles, you have a crisis of democracy. So another answer to what you could do is, like Charlie said, follow those people and try to reconnect the troubles to issues. That's a hard challenge, but it might be something that could address your question.
Well, that one is definitely going to take some more thought.
Yeah.
I wanted to turn to the membership puzzle for you to tell us a little bit more about
Sure.
what's involved in that. What are you hoping to get out of it? How does it work? How does the correspondent fit into it?
Well, I'm the director of the Membership Puzzle Project. It's a grant-funded program. It's a research project, and the correspondent is a partner in the project with us. And since The Correspondent, the world's most successful member-funded news site, is trying to expand to the United States in English language publishing, we thought we would engage in kind of a two-way knowledge exchange. One is to bring the lessons of the correspondent's experience to the rest of journalism. And the other is to investigate other forms of membership that have been tried and some successful in the rest of the world so that the correspondent has the benefit of their experience. So that's essentially what the Membership Puzzle Project does. We're studying different membership models as we find them, and we're trying to clarify what's different about membership. So for example, a founding distinction of our project is that subscription is when you pay your money and you get a product. If you don't pay your money, you don't get the product. It's a product relationship. Membership is when you join the cause because you believe in the work.
Right, so there's a fundamental difference between membership and just paying for things.
Correct. And then we further distinguished, as we sorted through our research findings, between thin forms of membership and thicker forms of membership. Thin membership is when you are a member, you give money, maybe you get a tote bag, maybe you get some other goodies, but your relationship stops at donating money. Thicker forms of membership are, yes, you support with your money, but you also support with your knowledge, with other forms of participation. You're the people formerly known as the audience. You engage with the journalists. You help with sources. You help with fact-checking, all of which the correspondent has done very well. Finally, the really important thing about the distinction between subscription and membership is that membership does not require or necessarily imply a paywall. And the reason is that members of news sites that we talk to a lot of people who support news organizations, they want the work to spread beyond those who are able to financially support it. They want it to circulate. And so it's not like when you're a $400 a year subscriber to the Jessica Lessons The Information, where you subscribe because you want an edge over other people who don't subscribe. In membership, people support the journalism because they believe in the work, and therefore they want the work to spread.
So it's much more public focused
Yes.
than just a paywall. Because this is something
Yes.
I've been thinking about probably, I don't know, maybe 10 years. What is, because people would always use the terms subscription, paywall, metered paywall, and membership as though they were all the same thing, but they're clearly
They're
not. Yeah.
Not. And membership is more compatible with the public service
Right.
mission of journalism, and it's more compatible with what motivates people to go into journalism.
And was that something that the correspondent thought about from the beginning? Was that the model that they deliberately chose?
Yes, they started first with no ads. And no ads has a huge effect, not only on your business model, but on everything you do. Because when you are no ads, attention is not the commodity anymore. And all sorts of bad habits that digital journalism got into by seeking attention only because they sold attention are unnecessary. The decision the correspondent made was, if you go to digcorrespondent.nl, you do meet a request to become a member, and you can't access the journalism randomly. But that's not how people access journalism. They access through social, through links, through the spread of others who are sharing it. So any link that you come upon to the correspondent is free, and there's no limit, there's no meter.
It doesn't time out.
It doesn't time out. But they came up with this ingenious little device. When you click on a link from the correspondent that a member, let's say, shared on Facebook, no matter how many degrees of separation away, it says this
Who
link.
shared it?
It says this link was brought to you by Mathew Ingram, member of the correspondent.
Right.
And a certain percentage of people see that little notice, and they say to themselves, could be 10%, 1%, maybe less than 1%, and they say, you know what? I want to be the person
Interesting.
who's the patron providing the correspondent to other people. And that ends up being their best recruiting device.
So it's sort of virtue signaling in a way.
Yeah, it's that. It's also the feeling that if I'm getting something out of this, I should support
Right.
it. And that's why we call membership joining the cause.
I think Sarah Lacey's site, Pando Daily, did something similar. I don't know if they got the idea from the correspondent, but I noticed it when I clicked a link that it said who shared it.
Yeah,
Very
there are other sites
powerful,
that do
very
that.
powerful.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. It is a powerful thing.
So I'm curious why it's called the membership puzzle. What is the puzzle?
The puzzle is, what do you give people or offer them in order to get them to become members? And the traditional answer to that is,
Tote bags.
yeah, goodies. We don't think that actually is very important
Does
at
the
all.
correspondent have tote bags?
No.
No. Okay.
So our question is, what sorts of opportunities to interact with the site, the journalists, the journalism, will draw people in and cause them to become members? And what are the strengths for the journalism of having members? Here's another way to think about it. I'm a subscriber to the New York Times. That's a product relationship. I've been a subscriber for more than 25 years. The number one asset the New York Times has is its brand. That's worth $1 billion. The second most valuable thing the Times owns is its people, the talented people. The third most valuable thing the Times has is not the trucks or the equipment, which could go out of date tomorrow. It's the readership. The knowledge and sophistication of the Times readership is an asset of immense value. And yet, no one within the New York Times is full-time, as far as I know, on the problem of how to get that knowledge and sophistication flowing in to the organization so as to make better journalism of it. That's a membership puzzle.
They do a certain amount of work on their comments, though, right? They have a team.
Yes.
They highlight
Yes,
comments.
they do.
Certain readers, I think, at one point they had an experiment where you could graduate effectively or be promoted if your comments were consistently good. You could escape moderation and your comment would just go up.
Yeah, they've actually done a lot on comments, and they've put a lot of energy into it. They've spent a lot of money on it. They've also spent technology time on it.
If anybody has a question, just feel free. Oh, there's one. Do we have a mic? Keep trying. Do we
I
need
don't.
it?
Oh, right, there we go. My question is, what's been the effect of the proliferation of cheap news on the growing distrust of the journalism institution over the last several decades?
The proliferation of cheap news.
Cheap news.
What is cheap news?
So in an attention economy, you want to create content for as cheap as possible so you could sell it for as high as possible. So, you know, the conversation around fake news is really important, but fake news is only possible because journalism is producing cheap news for so long, and the cheapest news to create is fake news. So how has that played a role in growing distrust in the institution?
Yeah, I think I understand what you're asking. When we ask people, why do you become members of these independent news sites? Why are you a member of the Texas Tribune? Why are you a member of Reveal in California? Why are you a member of The Correspondent? They typically start off not by talking about the site that they're members of, but by listing a number of things about the news system that frustrate and dismay them. So they talk about clickbait. They talk about misleading headlines. They talk about old-fashioned sensationalism. They talk about stories that explode and dominate the news for 4 days, and then you never hear about them again. They talk about problems that are visited in the news, and we never hear anything about how to solve them.
And they see these sites as an alternative to
Yes, and they see these sites as the alternative to cheap news. And when we talk to other membership sites that are like new to our orbit, we describe this for them, and they say, "Oh, it's the same for us." Like sometimes they'll say word for word, that's what our members say. And so my interpretation of that is that membership is picking up on very widespread dissatisfaction with bad habits that journalists adopted as they tried to adapt their routines to digital publishing.
Which is fair, except I think the kind of thing we're talking about, whether it's cheap news or fake news or clickbait or sensationalized news, the media has always done that. Newspapers effectively invented clickbait before you could click. They wanted to sell newspapers. You know, the New York Sun made up Man Who Lived on the Moon and sold a billion newspapers. So maybe social technology in particular and the web have exaggerated that problem, but it was a problem that existed before.
Yeah, but it's just, it is come at people with a vengeance because of metrics, because of the speed, because of how many publishers there are, right? Because of the desperation that the declining advertising subsidy has created. So it's not that, so I called it old-fashioned sensationalism. Right, it's been around forever, but these bad habits have overtaken a lot of journalism.
And would you say that Facebook and other platforms are key actors in doing that? That they sort of fuel that phenomenon?
That's one of the many problems with Facebook, yeah.
Does The Correspondent or do these other groups, do they make use of Facebook or do they avoid it?
They do, and I think they do what smart news sites do, which is if you know what your strategy is, if you know what you're trying to accomplish, then you can play ball with these systems as long as you have a way of knowing when they're not working for you. So, for example, I talked to Mark Thompson, the CEO of New York Times, about this. And the New York Times has a very clear strategy. They're trying to convert casual readers into digital subscribers. That's the whole game. Right? Once you have a very clear strategy like that, then you can try instant articles, you can try playing with Facebook, as long as you know what your strategy is and you have metrics of your own to tell you whether it's working or not. So The Correspondent, yeah, sure, they use Facebook, but there is nothing in their model that is dependent on Facebook for their survival.
Questions? Yes?
Mi scusi, io parlo in italiano, preferisco. Sono Monica Gobbato, sono un avvocato e sono anche una data protection officer, quindi mi occupo di privacy. Scusi, ripeto, Monica Gobbato, avvocato e data protection officer. Più che una domanda è un'osservazione. Credo che adesso appunto c'è questa guerra dell'attenzione, no? E quindi bisogna in qualche modo cercare di arrivare alle persone. Se posso fare un paragone con questo evento, noi vediamo gente che ascolta per ore ed è interessatissima perché questo evento è molto ben riuscito. Allora mi chiedo perché questo evento è molto ben riuscito. Io credo che ci sia un mix tra tecnologia e passione. Questo evento è riuscito a mischiare tecnologia e passione. Mi piacerebbe che il giornalismo segua quello che sta succedendo, l'evoluzione nel digitale, mettendoci dentro tanta emozione. E questo potrebbe essere forse un inizio di una ricetta. Volevo sapere cosa ne pensate. Grazie.
The question was, how do you attract people to your journalism if it is responsible, verification-based? And the suggestion was that it's the combination of smart use of technology and the passion of good journalism that does it. And I agree with that. I think that's close to like the center of where we need digital journalism to go. It has to be very tech literate, very smart with numbers and metrics, very quick to adapt to new ways that the audiences are getting information, where they're spending their time, and extremely passionate about the traditional virtues of journalism, like holding people accountable and telling great stories and digging under the surface of things. And yeah, it's some kind of combination like that we need. Extremely tech savvy and deeply committed to both public service and to audience engagement. Somewhere in there is the future.
I have a question related to particularly the correspondent model. So no advertising. Mm-hmm. And I agree that there's a certain purity to that. You're connected directly to your supporters, directly to your members. No one gets in the way of that relationship. Is advertising fundamentally incompatible with the type of membership or community-based journalism you're talking about?
I wouldn't say that. I think the business model sustainability problem in public service journalism is so hard, so challenging, that we should celebrate anybody who solves it for themselves. And I don't think there's going to be like one model to replace the one that the internet broke. There's going to be a series of one-offs, a series of individual solutions. And typically, it will involve a mix of revenue. But I have to go back to something you said, that the virtues of the ad-free model that the correspondent uses, it's not about purity. It's not about like, we're too good for advertising. It's a very practical decision that they're making.
I just meant it was cleaner, not so much
cleaner,
pure.
okay, right. But when you say purity...
Less encumbered. Yeah, I didn't mean purity like, well, angels and purity and whatnot. I just meant like cleaner.
It's cleaner.
More efficient.
And it allows them to escape from the daily news cycle, which is another thing that its members say they like about it.
So the other related question, I guess, and if anybody has another one, please put your hand up. We're getting close to out of time, but so membership-based communities, are they inherently smaller because they're just reach isn't a big part of what they do? They're not going to be mass. They're not going to be, because there aren't enough people who want to do that. Are they inherently smaller, focused, and is there a problem that they become more insular because they sort of, it's a virtuous circle involving just the true believers?
Well, the paying members are a subset and a small subset of the readers. So we shouldn't think of the members and the readers as the same thing. But inevitably, those who become members are going to be merely a sample of the public that, let's say, the correspondent addresses. And yes, they're quite aware. We asked them this question. They're quite aware that they're not a representative sample of Dutch people, nor are the journalists at the correspondent, and they're highly aware of that as well. But it doesn't mean that the journalism has to be limited to those people, because it circulates beyond that. Also, one of the reasons that I stressed the strength of the relationship between journalists and the people who value their work is that real journalism puts strain on that relationship. It's sort of like a marriage if you've ever been married. I know you are.
I don't know what you're talking about. Strain. Yeah.
Okay, just hear
Never-
me out. Hear
never
me out
felt
here.
it, okay.
I'm sure you'll recognize it eventually. The stronger your relationship, the more easy it is to withstand the ups and downs of a marriage. It's similar in journalism. When people have a strong bond because they understand your mission, they agree with it, they support the work, they join the cause, they also know how journalism operates, they're literate in how it unfolds. When you have that kind of a relationship, then when a story appears that alienates them or makes them angry
They're
or
more
they disagree
forgiving.
with, they're willing to live with it, right? That's loyalty, right? They're not going to exit right away. And when you're strong on voice, which is what the correspondent is, you give them a lot of voice, that also creates loyalty. So it's not that the members have to become censors of the journalism. When the relationship is healthy, the journalism can range well beyond the members. But still, are they a representative sample of Dutch society? No, they're not.
Question.
Yeah, we talked about advertisement, but we didn't talk so much about sponsors. Like, for instance, this festival has some very big sponsors, like Amazon or Facebook, Google. My question is, can sponsorships like undermine trust, between readers and publishers?
Good question.
It can. Certainly, if you're taking money from Facebook and you're trying to report on Facebook, that's a problem, right? But we can also start to educate sponsors that when you lend support to journalism, it means that you're not only not going to get a break from the journalists you're sponsoring, but chances are they're going to end up criticizing you. The more we're able to educate sponsors about that, the more viable sponsorship becomes, but it still is inevitably going to raise that question. So it's not a magic solution. But that's why I say we're never going to find a model to replace the one the internet broke, and so we have to be patient and tolerant with all kinds of different combinations of funding that allow public service journalism to go on.
Anyone else? Yeah.
So I'm looking for a recommendation. I work for a huge organization in Germany, the ARD. We have a perfect membership model. We force people to pay 17 euros a month, and they all pay us.
How do you force them?
It's tax-like,
Okay.
so they actually go to jail if they don't pay.
Terrific. That's a
Yeah,
great model.
so you should all adopt it.
Yeah,
So,
that's
but it's a huge organization. I kind of envy the correspondent and crowd reporter who's doing the same thing in Germany for the possibility to report the news that way. I think it's great to have those communities, but as a huge organization as we are, we report all the news all the time. How do we even begin to do that? Do we have any recommendations on that?
how do you begin to
To have this community model. Like we have a thing where we answer questions that come up in Facebook a lot, and we do some real digging and produce good journalism around that. That's a way to start, but you cannot have a group of 80 million people
Right.
talking with
how do you build a
about your-
community with 18 million people?
Well, the first thing you do is you master the 1% rule of online life. The 1% rule says in any publishing situation online, 90% of the people who come to your site will only consume the product. That's all they'll ever do. 10% may engage in some way, like leave a comment or register. And 1% may become actual contributors to the site. And so you're not talking about 18 million people. You're talking about 1% at most of those people that you need to start engaging. So that's one answer. Another answer is a project that I'm currently running called Join the Beat, in which we're trying to figure out how would membership work at the level of a beat, a reporter's beat. And the idea is people who have either specialized knowledge, expertise, experience in that beat, or passion, which means time to devote to it, can become members of it and help make the journalism better. So there, what we're asking is for the journalists not to engage with 18 million people, which is a practical impossibility, but to engage with a small subset of those people who feel strongly about the journalism done in that beat and have either knowledge, experience, or time to devote to it. And so that makes it much more manageable.
Does it ever bother you that we were talking about this 10 years ago? Same idea?
Not only were we talking about this 10 years ago, I ran a project
You were doing
identical
it,
to
yeah.
this in 2009, and I'm doing it again 9 years ago because it didn't work the first time, and I think maybe the third or fourth will be the charm, right? Does it bother me? It did at one time. Now I've become a patient man.
I admire your stick-to-itiveness. I think this is the fourth or fifth time at least,
Yeah.
under different names.
Because in this case, I believe that one day this is the way beat journalism will be done.
I hope you're
And
right.
I just hope I'm alive when it happens.
I think we have time for one more, maybe. Yes? Torsten?
Hi. I'd just like to add something to the person from the IRD. In terms of identifying a subset of people, it might be worthwhile considering to look at people in Germany who are already in a certain mode of like what the correspondent is doing in the Netherlands. I'm from Perspective Daily, which is a kind of, you can say, clone of the correspondent. We're doing a very similar thing of journalism. And feel free to get in touch with Perspective Daily in terms of identifying that subset of people.
Do you have a question?
No, it's just a comment,
Okay.
sorry.
Okay, no problem. Does anybody have a question?
By the way, Ernst Jan, the CEO of The Correspondent, and myself are doing a session tomorrow about the way The Correspondent does its journalism and does this kind of engagement. So if you're interested in getting more details about it, tomorrow, show up.
So, Tracy Powell with All Digitocracy and the Democracy Fund. I want to push back a little bit, I think. We talk a lot about consumers not trusting us, but what if they trust us to do exactly what we've always done and how we've always done it? Charlie mentioned earlier about following the people who've exited. Well, they haven't exited completely. They may have exited mainstream journalism, but they follow independent journalists or independent news organizations who they trust or who they have a relationship with. And I wonder what's stopping us from doing a better job collaborating with those people or those organizations that are trusted by news users.
I think it's an excellent point. If they've exited from the mainstream news system, but they found individual journalists or specialty sites that they do trust, then that's something that the rest of the press needs to understand, support. That's where collaboration can come in and become extremely valuable. And if they're not there on the end of your communication channel, but they are on someone else's, that's something to pay attention to. It's also a case where I think academics, journalism schools can help bridge the gap between a kind of journalism that's alive for audiences that felt badly served by the mainstream media and the rest of the press. So, Tracy, I take your point completely. I think it's an excellent observation.
And I think we are out of time, so please thank Jay for coming.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for coming. And Jay will be around tomorrow, session tomorrow. And if you see him walking around, he loves people to just interrupt him randomly with questions. Feel free to do that. Thanks, Jay.
Thank you.
It's good.